morning. So on behalf of the University of Southern California and Saul Price School of Public Policy, I'm pleased to welcome you to the USC Summit, Global Solutions in the Age of Homegrown Violent Extremism. I'm Erroll Southers. I'm going to be your MC today. And I do want to just take a moment to do two things. First, please allow me, as I always do, join me in thanking the men and women in service to our country's public safety, homeland security, and national security. Second, I just want to make a comment about the North Valley Military Institute. I was just here and presented colors. I'm really proud of them. If you don't know, we have a military institute in LA Unified School District near Valencia. They are an amazing group of young men and women who go to school there and have a 100% acceptance rate to four-year universities. So we are certainly connected to them and hopefully going to get some of them who want to go on to the service academies to come to our ROTC programs and go through the process here. I also want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, this event would have remained just a dream. As noted in my welcome remarks in your program, we convened this summit in order to recognize, applaud, and build upon the efforts of President Obama's White House Summit on Countering Violent Extremism and other similar forums that have come before. The events that make this gathering necessary are global and becoming all too commonplace. You're here because you're interested in why, and even more dedicated to engaging in education, research, and community-based activities to shape the discussion of why not. Today, you'll hear some incredible stories about work that goes on untold and unmentioned because it may lack the sparkle required to adorn the front page of or the top news hour of the story. You'll hear some amazing journeys down the path of radicalization and back, initiatives tackling extremist messaging, examining the landscape of the past quarter century of domestic terrorism, and explore innovative approaches to define the next steps toward holistic strategies intended to better inform policy and global solutions. Before I introduce my dean, I'm going to ask you to be engaged today. So since you're all on your phones anyway, we're going to put them to use. We're going to offer you an opportunity to engage in surveys throughout the day, and then offer you chances to share your thoughts and questions via our Slido online platform. So please follow the instructions in your brochure. You'll see we have the first question presented for you today. We'll be polling you here. We'll be polling you for those of you who are live streaming watching the summit today. By the way, I have colleagues that are live streaming from as far away as Yemen, so this should be quite interesting. If you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag USCHVE Summit for today's event. I've had the honor to serve Dean Jack Knott since his arrival in 2005. Prior to that, when I was a master's student at the School of Policy, Planning, and Development, we were ranked 12th in U.S. News and World Report. Under Dean Knott's tenure, we became the Saul Price School of Public Policy and rose to our very prestigious 4th place ranking, and we are on our way, as Dean Knott recently proclaimed, to becoming the best comprehensive school of public policy in the world. Dean Knott's academic career, offered in our brochure, is highlighted by his publication of 3 books, journal publications, and extraordinary awards one might expect of a leading scholar in the fields of political institutions, public policy, health policy, public management, and dean of our prestigious school. But rather than read that to you, let me tell you something about the man who's brought us here. The rigors of a dean are second to none. Nonstop meetings, travel, development activities, lunches, and dinners. I recall a conversation with his wife, Cherry, who's the associate dean of our School of Social Work, telling me that the first year they were here, they actually had dinner at home less than 5 times. After years of working with Dean Knott, I thought I knew almost everything about him until he surprised me again. In our partnership with the State Department, we routinely host foreign delegations of violent extremism experts from around the world. Often accompanied by translators, we hosted a delegation from Germany one afternoon, and to my surprise, I learned Dean Knott was fluent in German, and he conversed with our experts and our guests. So in addition to being a scholar, prolific tennis player, here I found out about his foreign language skills, which were totally unknown to me. Dean Knott has moved this school to another level, and as he does, the faculty, our students, and the university rises to new heights in order to respond to constantly evolving challenges such as the one that brings us here today. It gives me great honor, pleasure, to introduce to you the C. Erwin and Ione Piper Chair, Professor, Dean of the Price School of Public Policy, my boss and my friend, Jack Knott.
Wow, who was that guy? Thank you very much, Errol. I really appreciate it. Errol has been a remarkable faculty member here at the Price School, coming out of the world of practice in very prominent positions with the Schwarzenegger administration, as well as LAX, a leading figure now in the world in homegrown violent extremism. So I urge you to read his book. He knows people personally. He does interviews. It's one of the most remarkable research agendas we have in the school. So thank you very much, Errol. I'd like to give Errol a round of applause for organizing this conference. So on behalf of the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy, I really want to welcome each and every one of you to the USC Global Summit on Homegrown Extremism, and it's really great to see all of you here in the beautiful town and gown right in the center of campus. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge a special guest in attendance from the USC Central Administration, and that's Errol Pazinger, Vice President of Civil Engagement. Errol, are you here? I was told you are. I don't see you. Okay, we'll acknowledge him in absentia. He's been a big supporter of this program and our school, so thank you, Errol. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. Without their generous support, of course, we wouldn't be able to put on this program at all, and I'd like to list them, and then I'd like to thank them as a group. Special thank you to Gordon and Susan DeCombs with Alliant Insurance, along with fellow corporate sponsors, Amwins Group. In addition, Berkeley Public Entity Managers, Chubb, Markle, and Great American Insurance Group. In addition, we are grateful for the support of Gen Next Foundation and the City of Los Angeles, as well as dear friends Harry Zimmerman, Robert and Rachel Clifford, Pat and Ira Cohen, and Helen Galen and Jamie Kabler. Could we give all of our sponsors a round of applause? Putting on an event like this also takes many people, and so I'd like to also acknowledge them as we begin. I want to thank the groups who were instrumental in stewarding today's summit. I want to especially mention, and I'd like you to stand if you're a member of this group, the USC Safe Communities Institute Board of Advisors. Would you please stand? And also the HVE Summit Working Group responsible for planning and logistics. I really appreciate all your work as well. Thank you. Some of you may not be that familiar with the Price School. I just want to take a moment to explain who we are and the work that we do. We were established in 1929, so we're about to celebrate our 90th anniversary as one of the oldest and highest ranked public affairs schools in the country. We're dedicated to promoting and developing innovative policy solutions to improve the quality of life for people and their communities here and abroad. That's our mission, and it guides everything that we do. We achieve this mission through interdisciplinary education and research that addresses the most critical issues facing society, such as violent homegrown extremism. And we are committed to making an impact through service and engagement in the community and with policymakers, such as important summits like we are having today. You know, as Errol mentioned, in light of recent events, this summit could not be convened at a more critical time, unfortunately. From Berlin to Barcelona, from New York to Nice, from San Bernardino to Charlottesville, each tragedy is a sobering reminder of the realities that we face today, each and every one of us. It can happen anywhere. What makes homegrown violent extremism especially challenging is that it is a problem on a global scale, but with very local roots. No matter where one calls home, the shadow of HVE can loom, especially considering the diversity of ideologies fueling extremism. They can stem from anti-government extremism, racial right-wing extremism, issue-oriented extremism on particular issues, as well as religious causes and extremism, or some combination of those. So this is a very complex problem, and it calls for data and analysis and research that will further our understanding and hopefully lead to more effective solutions toward a safer world. One of the key focal areas of the Price School and a hallmark of our expertise is security and public safety. Our school has a long-standing commitment in this area with executive education in public safety dating back more than 70 years. So we've been engaged in this for a long time. Today, our USC Safe Communities Institute, of which Erroll is the director, is a major contributor to our leadership position in this field. The center conducts research on community-based extremism prevention initiatives, offers training programs for public safety leaders from a variety of backgrounds seeking to better engage the people and their communities in the places where they serve. A recent example is our partnership with USC Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work. We've partnered with that school and with the LAPD to design and deliver what I consider a transformative new certificate program that better educates police officers to face 21st century policing issues. It includes training around homelessness, mental illness, domestic violence, human trafficking, and homegrown violent extremism. The program helps officers more effectively interpret the actions of people in their social contexts and thus try to de-escalate away from situations, therefore reducing the risk of violence. Globally, the Price School, through our USC Safe Communities Institute, has hosted delegations from over 50 countries just within the last 2 years, as Errol mentioned, as part of the USC State Department's International Leader Visitor Program. In this program, officials meet with our experts to share research and ideas related to countering extremism. In addition, our faculty actively engage on issues of HVE with academic institutional partners in the UK, France, Germany, and Israel, and these are very active, engaged partnerships. The common thread woven among all these efforts is the recognition that the most effective strategies start with building trust in the community. That's fundamental. We cannot simply arrest and prosecute our way out of this problem. That's a reactive. Education, research, and community engagement are essential parts of the solution. So we must consider ways to provide escape for individuals who are on the path to radicalization, from counseling to family programs, and we must see local efforts as building towards a more global solution. So through today's summit, we have an opportunity to make a positive impact in bringing together the foremost academics and practitioners and scholars on this topic. We want to advance evidence-based research around the HVE issues and hopefully cultivate ideas for actionable solutions. We're not just here to talk, we're here to come up with solutions that we then can take into the field. So I really look forward to an insightful and thought-provoking day of discussion and exchanges. So thank you very much. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It looks like he maybe has just arrived, so this is just in time. Just have a seat a second. I'm going to give you a little introduction. Jeff Gorell is the Deputy Mayor for Homeland Security and Public Safety for the City of Los Angeles. And in this role, Jeff advises Mayor Garcetti on policy issues related to security and resilience. He supervises the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, a huge responsibility that oversees more than 35,000 city employees of the LAPD, LA Fire Department, and LA Emergency Management Department. The Office of Public Safety also houses and directs LA's Gang Reduction Youth Development Program and the Mayor's Crisis Response Team, and 3 Homeland Security and counterterrorism operational programs. So this is a broad range of responsibility. Jeff and his senior staff coordinate with other regional, state, and federal agencies to ensure that Los Angeles is secure and fully prepared for any emergency or natural disaster. In addition, his prior experience includes serving as an elected member of the California State Assembly, the Deputy District Attorney in Ventura County, a university professor, and a military intelligence officer. He has a much more interesting background than I do. And given that last week was USC's Military Appreciation Week, it is fitting to note that Jeff is also currently an active drill commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve and was deployed twice to Afghanistan. So please join me in welcoming Deputy Mayor Jeff Gorell.
Good morning, everybody. I apologize for being late. It took me an hour and a half to get here through the traffic this morning. I am not the deputy mayor that is responsible for traffic, but I do have her telephone number, and I will share that with you at the end of my remarks so that you can call her like I will be calling her. Thank you, Dean Knott, for that introduction. I do want to say thank you to USC and specifically to Dr. Erroll Southers for allowing the mayor's office to be a co-sponsor of this very important event. I had the opportunity to lead a delegation of Los Angeles civic and community leaders to Europe earlier this year. We visited 4 countries and 7 cities to study how Europe is grappling with these similar issues with violent extremism and ideologically driven violence. And what we learned a lot, but what we learned primarily was that although Los Angeles in many ways is farther behind some of these cities in Europe, in many ways we're farther ahead. We're farther ahead in that we've begun our development of our program here in Los Angeles organically, from the community up, developing partnerships and creating a relationship-based organization that doesn't rely solely on government or on the community, but is a collaboration across all of those platforms. In many places in Europe, it's a top-down approach where the federal government created a program and then pushed it down to the communities. But we understand here that that the partnerships and the whole of the community approach is key to ensuring success and a sustainable security, particularly in the face of these complexities of homegrown violent extremism. Under the leadership of Mayor Garcetti, we've taken a number of steps to pave forward a collaborative effort. We've hired a director of SAVE, we call in the city of Los Angeles, Strategies Against Violent Extremism. And we've convened multidisciplinary experts and partners to expand and coordinate networks, to leverage resources and policies to invest in community-led solutions. This is why this summit is so important today, that each one of you here today expressing an interest in this important effort to protect our families, to protect our neighborhoods, and to protect our communities. I want to thank you all for everything that you do to help us create the bonds and the relationships that ultimately are going to keep Los Angeles safe. And it's an honor to be a co-sponsor with USC of this important event. So on behalf of Mayor Garcetti, the City of LA, 4 million Angelinos, good morning, and thank you all. And I look forward to a very productive and successful summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. I guess if the deputy mayor gets stuck in traffic, I shouldn't complain when I have to drive around. So, I've had the honor and pleasure of knowing Connie Rice for many years. As you might imagine, as the founding co-director of the Advancement Project and board chair of the Urban Peace Institute, the demands for her expertise and experience take her all over the world. And with all of that, anytime I text her, I get a reply within just a couple of minutes. It certainly is indeed an honor and a relationship that I truly cherish. For those of you who haven't heard Connie before, you're in for a treat. She's someone who's in the trenches and walks the walk. An icon in the annals of civil rights activism, designed to offer systemic fixes to entrenched inequality and injustice, she's transformed organizations and their culture, which, as we all know, rarely happens in a lifetime, if at all. Throughout our friendship, I've had the pleasure of learning about her experiences with death row inmates, one of whom was a member of the Klan, victims of police misconduct, whistleblowers, and other sufferers, as she describes it, of every stripe of discrimination, including sex, race, disability, and age. I've had the honor of joining her in meetings with her cousin, Secretary Condoleezza Rice, General Stanley McChrystal, and DHS Secretary Michael Chertoff to discuss how Los Angeles gang dynamic was actually evolving into what they described as an insurgency. I've listened to her recount meetings with MA, the Mexican Mafia, in order to restore peace in the streets. There isn't an OG, and that's original gangster for you who are unfamiliar with the term, who doesn't know and respect her. And for these individuals, respect is truly earned. A graduate of Harvard, having earned her law degree at the New York University School of Law, the LA Times designated her one of the 24 leaders considered the most experienced, civic-minded, and thoughtful people on the subject of Los Angeles. She's been described as the voice of Los Angeles oppressed, and someone who picked up where Clarence Darrow left off. I'm someone who has had the honor and privilege to call her my friend. Please join me in welcoming our morning keynote speaker, Connie Rice.
Errol, my friend, the privilege is mine, not yours. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so honored to join you today. Countering homegrown violent extremism. I think that Errol has created the right frame, and this is why. But before I start, let me tell you, my observations should in no way be seen as in any way diminishing or dismissing the tremendous efforts by law enforcement, intelligence community, the military, and local communities to thwart plots. Untold numbers of plots have been stopped by their work, and we will never know all their sacrifices. The stars on the wall, the CIA, we don't know. And how many headstones in Arlington for those who've made the ultimate sacrifice. We have an army of people who try to protect us, get up every day to do their best. I come from a military family. My parents were NSA, DIA, Air Force operatives. All you need to know is that my brothers and I also had dog tags. Not all military kids do. And in law school, I worked 24 hours a week in Tower 2 of the World Trade Center on the 81st floor, the State Department, New York State Department of Law. Had I still been there, I would not have survived 9/11. When I was doing death penalty litigation in Georgia, the Klan planted a bomb in the ACLU's offices, and we had to evacuate. When I lived in London, where my parents were doing classified missions, which they've never talked about, but my brothers and I figured it out, the IRA blew up the mailbox in front of our school on Eaton Avenue. That's as close as I've come. I don't face near the danger that many of you in this room face. With that said, what do we have in common? I spent most of my career, and LAPD will tell you, I don't leave. You end up giving me a parking space because I will sue you for 15 years, and then I will end up telling you you have to become my partner. What I realized, a lawsuit's kind of like a shotgun marriage. You really get to know your opponents quite well. And in spite of yourself, you end up liking your opponents in many situations. When I was dealing with LAPD mainly, because they are the mission leader in law enforcement in this region anyway, I would find that the officers could finish my sentences. And instead of continuing to see them as the opposition, I began to see them as allies because we were in the same business. We're supposed to be enforcing human rights, civil rights, and the Constitution, the promise of the United States Constitution. Well, that's my job too. And I said, why am I fighting you? We're supposed to be on the same page. We're supposed to be providing public safety. Because in my mind, as much as I wanted to do voting rights, there's no such thing as voting rights if you're dead. The first of all civil rights is the right to safety. And the first of all human freedoms is freedom from violence. Once I realized that we were in the same business, I changed my tacks. The reason that violent extremism is a good frame, and I know it's scary for communities, and I will say with this caveat that most of my colleagues in the ACLU and the Legal Defense Fund and MPAC and other groups that I'm affiliated with, they consider countering violent extremism too dangerous for them to do, especially in today's political milieu. But with that said, I agree with Erroll. This is a much more, it's a smarter frame, because this conference, you belong at this conference if you've noticed that if the definition of the problem excludes the majority of attacks and attackers, this conference is where you belong. If your strategies actually have been creating more blowback than payback and solution, you belong in this conference. If your definition of the problem, call it terrorism, violent extremism, if your definitions change with the wind or geopolitical convenience, you belong here. And if the definitions have been so narrowed that you're missing the most common drivers of the problem, and you end up fighting on the wrong fronts with the wrong tactics and using tactical solutions for enduring strategic problems, you're going to fail, and you belong here at this conference where we're going to reframe what we're talking about so that we can actually get to comprehensive solutions. Moreover, if your definitions and labels are so highly politicized that they're easily wielded as weapons to suppress legitimate dissent, peaceful dissent, to harass political opponents, or to stoke fears of refugees and immigrants, not only are you in the right place, but you need help, because that is actually going to create more of the problem. Now, finally, if your fears end up driving responses that are actually irrational or bordering on derangement, like when the mayor of Cannes, France, decided that modest bathing suits worn by Muslim women were actually a sign of affiliation with international terrorism, you need not only to be at this conference, you need psychiatric help. When you can't agree on the definitions, and when I realized that people with PhDs in counterterrorism had spent 4 years trying to get a definition of terrorism and they couldn't do it, I'm not qualified if they aren't. So rather than trying to understand that if your definitions and your way of thinking about the problem have aborted any ability to make coherent and meaningful distinctions amongst the threats, and your threat assessment ends up getting perverted, you belong here at this conference. Really, folks? The Charleston church massacre was considered terrorism, but the Sutherland Springs church massacre wasn't. Why? Nice, Barcelona, and Lower Manhattan vehicle mowing down folks, but Charlottesville wasn't called terrorism? Why? If Orlando's Pulse nightclub event, but not Vegas, was considered terrorism, but Vegas wasn't, and you can't explain why, this is the purpose of this conference. Now, I submit that the service that our counterterrorism operatives do is noble and absolutely admirable. What I'm suggesting is that the politics and the policies and some of the strategies that we have been using are not. And what I would like to do is tell you about a success here in Los Angeles. You heard both the dean and the deputy mayor mention. In LA, we have had a homegrown violent extremism epidemic in our street gangs. And I have to tell you, I've been working with gang intervention, actual gangsters, with officers, law enforcement for a long time. and with community groups, every single sector in an ecosystem. And what I realized was that when I saw the RAND study of our poorest kids, LA has 850,000 children who live in high poverty, high crime zones. We have, of those 850,000, about 130,000 live in high crime gang hot zones. During the crack wars in the 80s and the 90s, law enforcement was in extreme danger, but the community was where grandmothers were putting their children to sleep in bathtubs because the bullets would come through the drywall in the housing projects. RAND did a study of 4,000 LA Unified's poorest kids, and they found out that our local children in grades 4 through 6, 30% of them tested at post-traumatic stress disorder levels that matched those of soldiers returning from Fallujah and the children in Civil War Iraq. Not only that, 25% of the teachers suffered from PTSD. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've got PTSD, you can't learn. Kids were dodging bullets. There were drive-bys at least weekly. In our war on gangs, and we declared a war, we did a war on terrorism, there were at least 100,000 people shot. I don't know if Chief Paysinger is here, but he helped me figure out these stats for our big report. 100,000 folks shot, 12,000 killed, at least 15 police officers murdered, and at least 15 gang intervention officers murdered in a war on gangs. Over 30 years, LA spent $34 billion, and at the end of the 30 years, we had 6 times as many gangs and twice the gang members. We had 6 times as many of gangs and twice the gang members, over 100,000. Luckily, only 5 to 7% of them were virulently violent, but that was enough to put us into an epidemic of youth gang homicide violence, and we also had a general gang violence epidemic. Well, when I realized that I had won all my lawsuits against the police, representing the police, with the community, representing victims of police abuse, every single kind of class action you can think of, and we had not impacted the violence, I realized we needed to change our game. What we did is we got 40 groups together. Law enforcement. I called Wes McBride, who pioneered the gang unit in the sheriffs, and I called Wes. I'd sued him about 7 different times, and he had retired by then. I called him. I said, Wes, I need you. He said, damn it, Rice, I retire and you're still on me. You can't sue me anymore. I said, no, Wes, I need you. I said, we have one shot at changing the politics in this city. The city of Los Angeles is stuck on stupid when it comes to combating gang violence, and we've got to get it unstuck. We've got a contract. I've got 40 groups. I've got LAPD. I've got to have you. He said, you know what, Connie? I still don't like you, but I'm going to do this. You want to know why? I said, why? He said, the first day I got out of the Sheriff's Academy, the first 2 weeks, I arrested a kid. 10 years later, I arrested his son. 30 years later, 2 weeks before I retired, I arrested his grandson. He said, I've been swatting the same mosquito for 30 years. I destroyed that family, and I've done nothing to dent gang violence. I said, well, take a number, because every single one of my lawsuits has done absolutely nothing to reduce gang violence, gang joining, or the trauma of what these kids face in these gang hot zones. They couldn't walk to school safely. There were drive-bys, and finally, when the final drive-by hit those 6 kids in El Sereno, just mowed down, waiting for their school bus, I said, that's it. And the audacity of outrage is what made us change our game. We got together with Wes McBride, with Chief Paysinger, with Chief Bratton. I rounded up law enforcement, I rounded up the DA, I rounded up the gang czar that Governor Schwarzenegger had. He called me the gang lady. I We pulled together 40 of the groups. All of these groups are constantly fighting each other for funding, but we said, you've got to be mission-oriented, we've got to get in the same boat and row, and we have to come up with an evidence-based, fact-based diagnosis that assesses the complexity of the problem as well as the danger that we face. And we have to come up with a strategy that can meet the complexity, the intensity, and the level of violence that we have. The smartest thing we did is 40. We didn't do this from a civil rights lawyer's point of view. We had failed. We didn't do it from law enforcement's point of view. It's not that they had failed. It's just that we had set up a mission that no one agency or one sector could address. We keep asking law enforcement to do jobs it's not equipped to do, and we don't politically set them up to succeed at. With all of that, we had gang intervention. We had from UCLA and USC, we had gang anthropologists. We had violence reduction experts. We had sociologists. We had teachers. We had this full range. We put an army together. And we all went on to one contract to write a report. It was called A Call to Action, the case for a comprehensive epidemiological public health strategy to solution not strategy, epidemiological public health solution to Los Angeles County's gang violence epidemic. A mouthful. I wanted to call it Stuck on Stupid, but the other lawyers wouldn't let me do it. What we diagnosed was that LA needed a completely new frame. So what we did is instead of having law enforcement or civil rights, we said, no, we're going to let the World Health Organization epidemiologists drive this train. When we brought the epidemiologists out here, they analyzed the density and the complexity and the prevalence of the violence, and they came up with an analogy in public health. One top World Health Organization epidemiologist said, Los Angeles is to violence what Bangladesh is to cholera and diarrhea, which means the problem is not only pervasive and extensive, it requires an extreme remedy. We were on our way to third world levels of gang violence. Gangs not only controlled housing projects, parks, they control the hallways of our poorest schools. Once you get to that level, you have to do something radical. What we suggested was the wraparound, neighborhood-based, comprehensive public health strategy. It is multi-sectored, it is coordinated, it is sustained over a 30-year period, and it requires all experts as well as community experts, law enforcement experts, foundations, schools, churches. You have to organize that entire ecosystem around the mission of reducing violence. The most important thing that we did is we changed from a frame of war on gangs to attacking the trauma and the violence. What our report showed was that when you attack street gangs, not organized crime, but street gangs, you increase their coherence and you actually make them stronger. That's why we ended up with more gangs. We ended up with more gang violence. When we came together, and it was interesting to see Wes McBride sitting there with current gangsters as well as gang intervention, we came up with a wraparound strategy. And we required the city to change not only its mission, but we had to create new institutions. We had to focus all of the money into the hot zones and the hot zone gang areas. And we could not let the politicians determine the policy. We had to let the science, the epidemiological strategies, as well as the law enforcement and gang intervention strategies lead the way. And we had to tell them, no, you don't get to divide by 15. And it has to be in the mayor's office because the 15 council persons is like herding frogs. They cannot get anything strategically executed in a coherent, fast, nimble way. Well, that report weighed 12 pounds and we were done. The city promptly shelved it and had absolutely no intention of implementing it or changing anything. Close to the finish of the report, I was sitting at my desk and I got a call. I got a call from a man who identified himself. He said, ma'am, he said, I'm looking for Connie Rice. I said, who are you? He says, I'm from DIA. I'm in the Pentagon right now. I said, no, my cousin's down the street from you. Here's her number. He said, no, ma'am, I need the gang lady. I don't know how in the world I got in there getting called like that. I said, "Why are you calling me?" He said, "Because, ma'am, we've heard about the Gang Intervention Academy that you've created out there, and I've read a call to action. And you have what we call in counterintelligence a sustained incipient parasitic insurgency." Well, he stopped me dead in my tracks. I almost dropped my coffee cup. He said, "You have a parasitic insurgency, and what you are doing in Los Angeles is you are winning the cooperation of former insurgents to reduce violence, and we need your help." I said, "Oh, good grief. If stuff outside the green zone in Baghdad is this bad that they're calling LA for solutions, we're in real trouble." But then I thought about it. I was terrified of equating gangs with terror, because I know how that label gets abused, and it's used as carte blanche to railroad and to target, when the very people who can help you solve and reduce the violence levels, you're targeting them. Sound familiar? If what your strategies are doing alienate and cordon off the very people you need to reduce the violence, you got to change what you're doing. So Mr. DIA and I decided that I would have to think about it, because it had to be done very, very carefully. We could not conflate. We could not have that label put on our strategies. We would alienate not only the guys who can actually negotiate down retaliation shootings in the street, but we would fail to form the institutions that we needed. What I did is I called General McChrystal. I said, "Stan, I need your help. We've written this report. It's going to go nowhere because it requires political change. It requires the city to rewire its money. It requires some districts that are fairly safe not to get money. And it requires law enforcement to change its culture. And equally important, it requires poor communities of color in gang hot zones to change their posture, not only toward each other and toward the culture of death that gangs represent, but they also had to change their view of law enforcement and whether they could work with law enforcement rather than being opposed to law enforcement." Bottom line, we did political jiu-jitsu. We had to break some arms. But Mayor Villaraigosa embraced it, and Mayor Garcetti has taken up the baton from there. As a result, we've created the institutions that are capable of addressing gang epidemic violence, homegrown violent extremism, in a way that is culturally competent, culturally fluent, strategically effective. And in the end, after 14 years, here's what I can tell you. Because Mayor Garcetti empowered the GRID office to actually do a PhD evaluation of, have we actually reduced violence? Are we reducing the number of kids who go into gangs? Have we created the prevention programs that the wraparound comprehensive strategy requires? Are they working? If the kids stay in those programs, do you reduce the risk factors? Before, LA only counted the flyers they handed out for their meetings. This report said you actually have to tell us whether you've reduced violence, increased the cohesion of the community, reduced the risk factors, and also made police safer, and actually brought down crime at the same time. Is there any plan that can do all of that? Read a call to action. It turns out that 14 years later, we have a success story to report. Mayor Garcetti licensed Ann Tremblay, who is the current head of the GRID office, to do the evaluation of both the prevention, intervention, gang intervention, as well as the law enforcement strategies. I'll give you just one stat, because when I saw it, I told them, go back to the drawing board. You can't have succeeded at this level. But this was a report that was, the evaluation was done by USC, UCLA, PhDs from UC Irvine, Cal State LA. And they had to do innovative research to actually capture whether trust had been built. Because one of the elements of the comprehensive strategy, you have to build trust between the communities that are actually targeted by homegrown violent extremism. They are also part of the solution. Here's what the research showed, and I'll just give you a few metrics. When gang officers in LAPD roll out to a gang homicide alone, those gang homicides, 24% of the time, result in retaliation shootings. That's the thing about gang crime. It's never just one killing. There are always reverberation killings. When professionally trained gang intervention workers, remember DIA guy was calling about our academy, because he wanted to come see the academy of gang interventionists and how we trained former parasitic insurgents to actually contribute to peacemaking. Well, that gang intervention academy, which is still going on and is still paid for in large part by the city and by foundations, 14 years later, we have a level of professionalization for gang intervention, and their goal and their job is not to solve the crime, but to prevent the retaliation shootings. When gang officers roll out to a gang homicide by themselves, the retaliation shootings happen in 24% of the cases. Now that's way down from 60% 25 years ago. So law enforcement has also gotten much smarter, much more strategic. But when professionally trained gang intervention workers, one of the key recommendations in our call to action report, when gang intervention operators who are professionally trained roll out with or in tandem with gang officers, 0.7% retaliation. They no longer follow the ambulance to shoot up the emergency room. Why? Because we created a hospitalization protection protocol. The gang intervention workers follow the ambulance. They surround the hospital. They don't let anybody in there, and they know who the gang members are. They know who's armed. They actually know before the police. Probably the genesis of the particular homicide. Often that's the case. Ladies and gentlemen, in LA, with the help of General McChrystal, the help of my cousin, we have taken the right lessons from the war on terror and helped to transform LA's war on gangs into a comprehensive public health frame. And I think that changing the frame from the war on terror to the comprehensive wraparound strategies that are needed, it's not just clear, hold, build. It's clear, hold, heal, invest, educate, transform culture. If you transform the culture of the community, if you organize the entire ecosystem in a strategic, synergistic, strategic operation that is sustained not just over years, but over decades, which is hard to do with politicians because they all want to scrap everything that came before them. But you have to have this sustained for the comprehensive public health strategies. We will talk more about this at a panel this afternoon. I just want to tell you, this conference can come together and create those comprehensive strategies. You have the knowledge, you have far more expertise than any of us in LA did, but we managed in LA to make unlikely alliances. Me with Wes McBride and Chief Paysinger is about as unlikely as you're going to get. And when I walk in the room, they want to know, are you suing us or are you working with us? And I say, I'm working with you. We are at a point now where we can no longer afford to be stuck on stupid. We can no longer afford to ignore the fact that war, you will always need your warriors. Absolutely. You will always need to keep in mind all of the ideological drivers of violent extremism. As a feminist, I have to note, a lot of this looks like malignant masculinity. When you emasculate men, they come back with a vengeance, and they let you know, you're not annihilating me, and I will eliminate you. That is what I saw in the gangs. By the way, in that world, being called lady lawyer is actually an honorific. And yes, I do have their respect, but it's only because I've walked the streets with them. I've seen them dodge bullets. I've seen them take Glock 9s out of a 9-year-old's hands at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we've recruited them to help us as part of the Army. So DIA gets it. I'm sure everybody in this conference gets it, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't. You are in the right place. And I think that you are going to come up with far smarter strategies. Let's stop the politicization of this issue and get to the solutions. Let's focus on the violence and the trauma with comprehensive public health strategies, as we are doing in LA. We have not solved everything. We are a long way away. We still have a lot of cultural change, both within the community, law enforcement, as well as the politics. And we need to stop asking law enforcement to solve every problem because we're too cowardly to actually come up with the solutions. So end stuck on stupid. Let's get smart on solutions. This is the right place. You are in the right conference. Ending homegrown violent extremism. I don't know about you, but we can't afford to narrow this artificially just to focus on religiously perverted violent extremism. Focusing on the Muslim community alone is counterproductive. My family, my grandmother sat in a darkened kitchen after hiding the men in my family. And the women would sit in the kitchen in the dark with a rifle over their knees, waiting for the Klan. Those are the groups that I believe are the most immediate threat to our democracy and to our safety. If you're going to talk about homegrown extremism, do not narrow and artificially politicize these issues. It's too dangerous. We can't afford it. And while we've applied a lot of tactical responses to enduring strategic problems, this is the kind of conference that can shift that frame to long-term, enduring, comprehensive solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. The strategy can also be applied to climate change, but it takes complex, comprehensive strategies to meet this level of threat. Let's get the right threat assessment. Let's be smart about it. Let's try to expand what LA has been doing, because we actually have found the solution to the war on gangs being transformed into a war on trauma and violence. Congratulations, Erroll, on this conference. Thank you for listening.